Good morning. We're going to get started. I think people are a little delayed with the rain, but we're going to get started. I'm Cheryl Roberts. I'm the Executive Director of the Greenburger Center for Social and Criminal Justice. On behalf of the Greenburger Center and Francis Greenburger, I want to welcome you here this morning. Thank you for being here. This is the second in a three-part series the Greenburger Center is holding this year called After Rikers. In March, we had our first program, and we looked at changes that are needed to the mental health service system for those who are incarcerated on Rikers and what that system should look like after Rikers. I think it's fair to say that most of the panelists felt that creating 4 new borough-based jails and embedding psychiatric units in the jails for those with serious mental illness is really not the way to move forward. And that we needed to remove those with SMI from the jail system to really provide them adequate treatment. Today we're here to talk about programs used both before and after incarceration with someone with serious mental illness in the criminal justice system. These programs help to redirect, divert, and generally bypass the criminal justice system. In September, we're going to discuss monetizing Rikers and how to do that, and then how to take the money, the proceeds, and hopefully reinvest them in new directions. And he doesn't know it yet, but I'm really hoping Francis Greenburger will be moderating one of the panels. So, but we'll see in September. More details on that in the future. We have a terrific panel today. I do have a couple of changes. On Friday, D.A. Clark and Senator Benjamin let us know that they had conflicts, so they will not be here with us today. But I am so grateful and thankful that Schiraldi agreed to be on the panel just yesterday to talk about parole. Because Vinny's bio is not in the program, I want to just take a moment and read his bio. So Vinny Schiraldi is a senior research scientist at Columbia School of Social Work and is the co-director of the Columbia Justice Lab. He has extensive experience in public life, founding the Justice Policy Institute. He then went into government service as director of the Juvenile Corrections in Washington, D.C., and was then commissioner of the New York City Department of Probation. Next, he became the senior policy advisor to the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, or MOCJ. Schiraldi gained a national reputation as a fearless reformer who emphasized the humane and decent treatment of the men, women, and children under his correctional supervision. He pioneered efforts at the community-based alternatives to incarceration in New York City and Washington, D.C. And Schiraldi received his Master's of Social Work from New York University and a Bachelor of Arts from Binghamton University. So thank you again, Vinny. I really appreciate it. Before we get to our panelists, just a few housekeeping items. There's no break today, but there is food. We've moved it into the room this time, so help yourself. The bathrooms are behind me. Wi-Fi, if you want to use it, is Greenburger in lower case letters. And we are being recorded today. I think there are, at least we are recording, and the video will be available in a couple of days. I think there might be other people coming to video as well. Someone's doing a mini documentary, so you might see other cameras. So if you're going to ask questions, just be aware you're being videotaped. So we're going to hear from our panelists for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we're going to ask them to explain the reason they're here, their basic program outline. And then I'm going to be joined by Valentina Morales from FedCap. Valentina, I want to thank you for working with me on the program and for participating today. Valentina actually asked a question at the last session, and she said, you know, why don't you have more people on your panels with lived experience or people who are providers? So I said, okay, Valentina, you're going to be on the next panel, and you're going to help me moderate and ask questions. So if you're going to ask questions, just be careful. I might put you to work for the next program. So thank you, Valentina. So just a breakdown of the panelists. We're going to look first at programs before someone touches the criminal justice system, and we'll hear from DJ Jaffe. It's a lot to say, DJ. And then Nancy Barto from Arizona. And then we're going to move to Judge Leifman, and he's going to talk about when that first 911 call is made and new versions of CIT 2.0 and 3.0. And then we'll talk with both judges and Judge Emic too about what programs they are spearheading for those who then become involved in the criminal justice system. And then finally we'll talk to Vinny Schiraldi about parole and parole reform and what he was hoping to achieve with the bill this session and what didn't happen and what hopefully will happen in the future. So I'm going to move over there, and we're going to start with questions. DJ, I have a question to start with for you. So you are really known for Kendra's Law. We're very active in getting it passed here in New York. How's that? Oh, so I was told that you could do this, but I guess not. All right, so that's a lesson for everyone. So DJ, you are known as the father of Kendra's Law, I think. And so I'd like you to explain what Kendra's Law is and what AOT is.
Kendra's Law is simply the single most effective program that the city has or the state has for people who are the most seriously mentally ill. It is for a very small group of people, about 123,000 nationwide, maybe 8,000 in New York State, 4,000 in New York City. What Kendra's Law does is it gives, if somebody with serious mental illness became violent, hospitalized, homeless, things like that, we had two alternatives: jail or inpatient commitment. And what this is a third way. It allows judges, under very limited circumstances, to order someone to stay compliant with treatment while they continue to live in the community. And it is not an alternative to community-based services. This is a way to see the most seriously mentally ill get into those services. The other part of the court order, very importantly, not only does it order the individual for a period of up to a year, and they have counsel and full due process rights, they participate in developing their own treatment plan, but it also orders the mental health providers to provide the treatment. And this is very important because many providers cherry pick. They want the highest functioning. They say, well, this person's not eligible because they abused substances, they had a felony, they can't manage their own care, they're not physically well. And what this does is it allows a judge not only to order the person to receive treatment, but to order the mental health system to provide it. Some quick statistics: it has reduced homelessness, arrest, incarceration in the 70 to 80% range. While mental health advocates claim that it violates civil rights, 80% of those in it who have actually been exposed to it says it helps them get well and stay well. And by reducing incarceration and hospitalization, it is saving taxpayers 50% of the cost of care, which can be reinvested in more care for others.
Thank you, DJ. So how many people in New York City are on AOT, and how many do you think could be or should be, in your opinion?
In New York City, there's about 1,200 on it, and there should be about 4,000.
So there are some who would argue that if we had a very robust managed care system with supported services, wraparound services, and we had more programs like Fountain House or Fountain House-like models that have very high levels of managed care and wraparound services, that we wouldn't need coercive tools, including AOT, at all or as much. What do you say to that?
Well, everyone's for more community-based services, but again, understand, with the exception of Fountain House and a few others, they were likely to reject people who meet this level of impairment. And in fact, in the law, to get into Kendra's Law, the judge has to decide that the person, quote, is unlikely to voluntarily participate in treatment. So to say that if we have more treatment that somebody is likely not to participate in is going to solve the problem isn't consistent with reality. The other thing is, in addition to that, these are people who have a history of non-compliance. So again, saying that if only they had more services, we wouldn't need it. The law says they have to have had a history of non-compliance that's been a significant factor in being in a hospital, a prison, a jail twice within the last 36 months, or resulted in one or more threats of serious violent behavior towards self or others within the last 48 months. So these are people who have a history of noncompliance. That noncompliance has caused major problems, and as a kind and compassionate society, we should be helping them.
Okay, so last question before I move on, and we'll come back to you, but so did we get this statistic right? Is it there's 4% of the U.S. population has a serious mental illness, and of that, is it 1% that you would estimate need AOT? Did we get that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, good. So Nancy, Representative Barto, are you a senator or representative? Because I've been
both and.
Yeah.
No, actually, thank you, Cheryl. Currently, I'm a state representative, but I was formerly a senator.
That's what I thought. So, but I'm glad. Thank you for clarifying, and thank you for being here from Arizona. We appreciate you coming out. I'm really excited to have you here because you were just a prime sponsor of a bill that developed funding for secure residential facilities. And as you know, Hope House, we've been working on a version of secure residential facility for a forensic population. You are working on it, or have put it together for a non-forensic, a civil population. So can you explain why you care about this issue so much personally, why you did this, pass this legislation, what does it do, and how many facilities do you anticipate coming online, and how many beds?
That's a lot of questions right in there. But thank you. I'm excited to be here because I think what Arizona did this past session is very important and pretty groundbreaking. We actually passed a bill recognizing the fact that our behavioral health has a gap, a serious gap in the continuum of care, and that involves that population that DJ was just describing. And so we enacted the legislation that will lay out the process for secure residential treatment places. This is long-term placements for people with that are resistant to treatment and that have exhibited those types of characteristics and have failed in previous residential treatment settings, and that present a serious threat to self or others, and are on AOT, or court-ordered treatment. So this is an incredibly important step that Arizona is taking. We're just getting started, which is why we're focusing on the civil population first, because we know that there's a pent-up need for more long-term settings to care properly and appropriately for people that have failed and that are slipping through the cracks, that are recycling through our hospitals, ending up homeless and in prison over and over again. This happened for a couple of important reasons this session. There has been a concerted effort, bipartisan concern in Arizona of our homeless population growing. We are the fifth largest. We had the fifth largest growth in homelessness in 1 year in our state. That's over 10% in 1 year. And so we put significant resources into our housing trust fund this year, but the case was made that 18%, according to the point in time study, of our homeless population in Maricopa County, which is the fourth largest county in the United States, are seriously mentally ill. And so if we're going to focus on solving homelessness, we had to focus on that population. So it necessarily had to mean reform in our mental health system. We recognized through the help of and the testimony of so many families, especially a new nonprofit called the Association for the Chronically Mentally Ill, who are primarily made up of family members whose kids have been in the system for often decades and failed within the system, came to the legislature over and over telling their stories of how they have had their kids falling through the cracks, re-hospitalized, in jail, homeless, and it made an impact. that we're not meeting the need. And so long-term facilities will. So we passed the policy to get that started.
So let me ask, how do people actually get to this facility? How do they stay? What is the security? How do you provide that secure environment?
It is the commitment process that our laws already are meant to that address in our for our state hospital. The same laws will cover secure residential, but it's quite different in the way it will be implemented because it will be a community setting, community residential, and secure in the sense that we're not reinventing the wheel here because it's being used in other settings, probably throughout the United States in assisted living, Alzheimer's units, memory care units. This is already happening throughout our state and probably throughout the United States in other ways. So secure will mean that there probably will be locked doors, alarm doors, there could be guards, but there'll be a variety of ways to ensure that a person can be contained and allowed a place, a safe place where they can actually stay in treatment, which is the goal. The goal is to enable a person to not walk away from treatment due to their illness, which is happening in an unsecure setting so often in residential treatment. So there will be a perimeter gate that's probably alarmed and locked, but each door probably will be open. There will be freedom of movement throughout either a house. It'll look like probably a typical house in a neighborhood or a cluster of houses in a neighborhood. It may be a perimeter gate, but it's not going to be a prison setting. That's not what we're going for here.
So is it fair to say that this is basically a civil commitment, but a commitment to a community-based locked facility or house rather than an institution? Is that? That's
exactly right. And that's what we were hearing. You know, we had so much support in the community. Our county attorneys, they're the first to say, you know, we don't want to lock these people up. They need treatment, but we have to keep the community safe. There's no safe place for us to send them. So yes, it would be a place where they can hopefully recover and receive treatment before they interact with the criminal justice system. You mentioned that it's not going to involve technically the criminal justice system. They won't be sent there through the court system because of a crime, a specific crime. But so many of the homeless have already had interactions. The police are looking at those records. And so what they will do when they see a homeless person, the police will be taking them to an urgent psychiatric center. And at that point, they can get a screening. And then through court orders, they could be court ordered to a treatment center rather than have to wait until they commit a horrible crime, perhaps. That's happening way too often.
You have something to say? No? Okay. We need to come back to you. There's a lot more I want to ask, but just very quickly, so I know it's 16 beds. The limit is going to be 16 beds because of the IMD, yes?
That is true.
Yeah. And
what's IMD?
Sorry, the Institutions of Mental Disease. It's a Social Security law that if you go above 16 beds, you can't get Medicaid. So, but we'll come back. So Judge Leifman, thank you for being here too. I know you had a horrendous time getting here, but thank you. So tell us first of all, what's CIT 2.0 and 3.0?
Sure, if I can just put it in a little bit different context, sure. I'll come back to that. You know, I think what you learn over time is that the criminal justice system in the United States in many ways is the repository for most failed public policies. And there really is no greater failed public policy than that towards mental health. And I don't think anyone should be surprised, because when you apply a criminal justice model to an illness, you're getting what you should get, a disaster. And what really we need to start thinking about is how do we approach these issues using a population health or disease model to an illness, and you'll start to see much better results. And so what we've been doing in South Florida now for almost 20 years is trying to apply a different model to this and a different approach to this these illnesses. And it's been remarkably successful. We now have, excuse me, a pre and post arrest diversion type system. And the pre-arrest, which I'm going to talk about briefly now, involves a massive crisis intervention team police program, CIT as it is known. It's a 40-hour training program that teaches our law enforcement officers how to identify people who are in crisis, how to de-escalate a situation, and then where to take them as opposed to arresting them. We have well over now 6,700 law enforcement officers trained at all 36 of our departments. The numbers are staggeringly amazing. The number of arrests in Dade County went from 118,000 a year to about 56,000 this year as a result of all these different parts and approaches that we're using. But that has enabled us to become more sophisticated in our newer approaches to what we're doing. So not only do we train the police officers in CIT, we also train our 911 call takers on how to ask the right questions so they can dispatch a CIT officer to a scene that's involving mental health. We have a liaison officer trained at every single department and every substation who then meet with the providers on a monthly and quarterly basis so that they can escalate situations so that people don't fall between the gaps. And you know, we're 2.5, 3 million size community, which is amazing. You can be that nimble, but if you set up systems in a way that's more responsive, you get a more responsive result. But we realized now that because we're collecting so much information and data, and just to give you an idea, our two largest departments over the last 8 years, which would be Miami-Dade and City of Miami, handled 83,427,000 mental health calls, which is significant in its own right. But out of those 83,427,000 calls, they only made 149 arrests, and which is startling and remarkable in its own right. But we also realize there's more to it at this point. And we have a lot of chronically ill, homeless individuals. I shouldn't say a lot. Miami has actually reduced its homelessness from 8,000 to 1,000. And the 1,000 that are left are primarily people with mental health and substance use disorders. And so we've just started what we call CIT 2.0, which was started with our Miami Beach Police Department and is now expanded to the City of Miami. And they actually call it, Miami Beach calls it the Homeless Resource Unit, and Miami calls it the Problem Solving Unit. And these are units within CIT. And we've now trained them to be able to initiate petitions for homeless individuals with serious mental illnesses and substance use disorders. And they will then go pick up the individual, take them to court. They file the petitions in the court. They then work with our managing entity, which is our organization that oversees the providers. We work with the individual to sign a release of information. We then pull up all of their medical and mental health background, and we work to find them housing. The police pick them up from the court hearing, take them to where they're going to be living. They then go and work and do spot checks on them, and the results have been wonderful, really, really phenomenal. And then the CIT 3.0 actually, sadly, came as a result of our horrific situation in Parkland. We are now, because we have such a sophisticated CIT program, the police set up a special, they call it a threat management unit through Miami-Dade, which is the largest county-wide, it's like our sheriff's department. And they go through every CIT call live every day. And they have about 13 detectives working in this unit. And if there's any indication of any kind of threat or violence, they then do a follow-up situation. But they send a plainclothes officer out to the house. They don't use a traditional police approach. They're not making an arrest. They develop a relationship and dialogue with the individual. If there's a weapon, we have a law now that allows them to remove the weapon. But more importantly, they're trying to encourage the person to call them first if they're not feeling well, and then they will go and work with our providers to help them get treatment. And the idea is to get ahead of these situations before there is an explosive situation. And what we're finding is they're calling these off detectives, and the detectives go out and they bring somebody from the provider situation. And it's really helping kind of keeping tabs on, and they're monitoring about 100 to 150 people at a time. And it's really, really helping avoid those explosive situations which all of us want to see. Because we really need to remind people that people with serious mental illnesses are no more dangerous than the general population. On medication, they're less dangerous than the general population. And so it's important for us to develop systems that, fit different needs. These are mental illnesses with different levels of acuity, and you need different approaches for these different elements. And that's how we're trying to approach it.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's remarkable what you're doing. So, it's interesting, last night you said that you don't run a mental health court, you run a court diversion
Correct.
program. So talk about the distinction and also about your new diversion campus that you're bringing online.
Sure.
And could you also just mention the role of peers in your diversion
Absolutely.
court? Thanks.
So I'll start with the peers, and then I'll go answer the rest of your questions. We have a staff, we have a diversion system. We don't have a mental health court. And maybe the court has had to take on a role that is not traditional, maybe primarily because the county does not have a mental health office, or the state really doesn't have a very strong system. And so we have a staff now of about 25 people that work for the court, and that includes 8 peers, and 4 of them are graduates of our program. And they get assigned to individuals who are coming out of the crisis system after we have had and worked with these folks to get them stabilized. And they act as boundary spanners, they act as navigators. Look, these systems for help are very complex. And even if you didn't have a mental health disorder, you would have a hard time accessing care. And so the peers help these individuals get through this. The county gave us a car, so when the person comes back from a crisis stabilization unit and they've started to stabilize, the peers in court with food, with clothes. You have to understand, for most people, by the time they get arrested with a serious mental health issue, they have clinical depression often on top of their serious mental illness. Their family relations have been destroyed, they have no real good relationships with other people, and the peers help reestablish that relationship. They help incentivize people to want to get better. And so they then drive them to where they're going to be living. We have a homeless trust. Until recently, we were the only county in the United States with a dedicated tax for homelessness, so we have access to some of those dollars, and we make sure that the person's going to have a place to live when they leave us, and all the supports come into play, and the peers help them access all those supports. But more importantly, they just develop relationships. They go play basketball with them, they go hang out with them. They just try to help them reintegrate back into society, which is what they need. Just like everybody here, you wake up, you want to have something good to do in your life. The same for people with mental illnesses. They're not different, they're just people. And when you can help them reestablish those connections, they do much, much better. So having said that, the new facility, we feel we've kind of reached an 80% solution, which is phenomenal. But the 20% that are left are the most acutely ill that we have not been able to succeed with. And one of the things we haven't talked about is the medical side of this. There is a small group of individuals with these very serious mental illnesses, particularly people with schizophrenia, that lack insight that they're even ill. And so you can have the best system in the world for them, but if they don't think they're sick, they're not going to take treatment. And so we've, kind of hit a wall with that population. There's also a lot of good scientific data and research out there now that for some individuals with serious psychosis that goes untreated for long periods of time, there is serious permanent damage to the brain. And so, again, we have different acuities of these illnesses, and so you have to develop systems for different people. And I guess the way to look at this is like cancer. God forbid you have stage 1 versus stage 4, you're going to get a different level of treatment. And so we need to start thinking about these illnesses as stage 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then when you have a more acute illness, you need a more acute approach. And so the acute approach that we're starting to take is we are building the first of its kind, one-stop shop diversion facility. And I'm very blessed to live in Miami-Dade County. Even though my county has absolutely no legal responsibility for mental health, they have allocated $42.1 million through bond issues, including $8 million from our local hospital, Jackson Memorial Hospital, to construct this first of its kind one-stop shop for this very narrow group of folks that are the most expensive, who keep recycling through the system the most. And it'll have all the systems and elements of care in one place. And you can get there one of two places. You can go pre or post arrest. We did not want to set up a system where you had to get arrested to get a higher level of services, or everyone would get their level and arrested to get the service, and we don't want that. So there'll be a receiving facility, and you'll be screened. And if you are one of our high utilizers, you get to stay. And if you meet, and you can stay one of two ways: A, being a high utilizer, and you meet criteria for involuntary commitment, or you're a high utilizer and you want to voluntarily stay. There'll be what we call a living room model, where they can hang out. There'll be food, TV, peers, and we'll do engagement. But it's also going to be a medical home model. So there'll be a crisis stabilization unit. There'll be a short-term residential facility in there. It's a 181,000 square foot, 7-story building. There will be a day activity program run by people with mental illnesses to teach self-sufficiency. There will be a culinary supportive employment program so that we can teach employment skills, so that as people leave us and reintegrate back into the community, they will have employment skills. There will be trauma services. Again, because it's a medical home, there will also be a primary clinic there to handle primary issues, which will help keep people out of the emergency room at the hospital. There will be a dental facility, an eye clinic. There'll be a tattoo removal program there, because people in psychosis do silly things sometimes. Like we had this one guy that had hell tattooed on his forehead. It's hard to get a job that way. So we will have those kinds of supports. There will be a courtroom in there so we can manage both criminal and civil cases. And there'll be 200 beds for housing so that people can live in the facility for up to a year if they want. And part of the key is it's going to be beautiful. We want it to be warm and welcoming. We want people to feel like it's a place that they can get better in, not just a place where they get thrown into because society has not taken care of their needs. And so we began construction about 3 weeks ago. We expect it to be open in 18 months or less. And we really think it's going to help us get to that last group. We did a study several years ago where we have an institute in Florida that can actually tell a community who the highest utilizers of criminal justice and mental health services are. And so we sent them the names of about 3,300 people who had been arrested in Miami-Dade that we knew had a mental health disorder. And they have access to all of our involuntary commitment laws, all of our arrest, Medicaid and Medicare records. And so they can really tell you everything you need to know about this group of individuals. So we thought, hey, they'll kind of narrow it to 1,000 people. It'll help us figure out what we're doing. We can focus on a smaller group of folks. Well, to our shock and dismay, they narrowed it down to 97 people, primarily men, primarily diagnosed with schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder, primarily homeless, and primarily co-occurring, meaning both mental health and substance use issues. These 97 people, over a 5-year period, were arrested 2,200 times. They spent 27,000 days in the Dade County Jail, 13,000 days at a state-funded psychiatric program, cost taxpayers $14.7 million, and we got absolutely nothing for it. And so the idea is there's more than 97, obviously, but it's for that type of individual that keeps recycling. The typical system can handle the lower acute folks. They can't handle the higher acute folks, which is why you're probably building the facility that you're building. And our hope is that by providing really intensive services for this very expensive, very ill population, not only will we get a much better bang for the buck of our dollars, but will really be able to help this population get back into recovery.
Thank you.
Because one last thing, recovery rates for people with serious mental illnesses are better than for people with heart disease and diabetes. The key is actually helping people get the level of care that they need for recovery.
Thank you, Judge. And I want to ask you about redirection, but I'm going to come back to you.
Mental
because
health courts, yeah.
Yeah, because that's very important for those who are needing to be restored and how you are redirecting them to the civil system. So, but Judge Demick, so I'm just so impressed with the work that you're doing and have been doing in Brooklyn, and it really doesn't get, I think, discussed, in part because you're so humble and you so quietly just go about your work, and you have been diverting people with felonies and higher level felonies for decades. It doesn't get a lot of attention, but you've been doing some really courageous work on managing risk, and so I just want to acknowledge that, and also because you're the homeboy here from Brooklyn. So you are now ahead of the curve, and you are diverting people accused of sex offenses and those with autism and developmental disabilities. So talk about that. Why did you move to that? Is this a big part of your docket, and what are some of the issues?
Well, just to give a little background, the Brooklyn Mental Health Court was formed in 2002 by a partnership with the chief judge at the time, Judith Kay, and the district attorney, Joe Hines. And the chief judge wanted a mental health court in New York State. They originated in the great state of Florida, and that's where the idea came from. And Brooklyn was chosen to be the first county, Kings County, to have a mental health court. The court was planned as a non-violent felony court. Immediately, we had referrals of people who had committed violent crimes. To partially answer your question, the project director at the time, Lucille Jackson, and I decided that if we wanted to help, we had to accept people who committed violent crimes. Sex offenses were out. They were charge ruled out. But as we went along, we had referrals of sex offenders who we felt we could help because, and I'll give you an example of that in just a second. And so for years, we have been taking people who committed sexual offenses. I'll give you an example of a middle-aged man, 56 years old, who was accused of fondling his own children. Now, I think that would be a case that everybody would agree is not one that immediately calls out for sympathy or for diversion from the criminal justice system. But in looking further into the case, the attorney did a good job in terms of convincing everybody. He had been abused as a child and diagnosed with major depressive disorder. He had crippling anxiety. He'd come into court having panic attacks. In our court, we have a psychiatric evaluation and a psychosocial evaluation done. It was determined with this particular individual that we felt he needed the help. He could be safely diverted into treatment, and that's exactly what happened. I mean, when he first came to the court, he couldn't sit in the courtroom. He would collapse, and it wasn't fair to the court officers to have to resuscitate somebody every time he came into court, which of course they come into court weekly. He took a plea to cause of sexual conduct against a child. His jail alternative was 5 years in prison if he failed. But because of the nature of the crime, he still, in the event of success, which he did succeed, agreed to a 10-year probationary period on a felony. And in 2 years into treatment, he was sentenced to probation, and we haven't heard from him since. Now, that was a person who I felt safe in managing the risk involved. He actually sent me a letter after he had graduated from the court, and this is what he said. So I'll give you an idea of the individual that we're dealing with. He said, I want you to know the truth about me. What I lived through as a child had a terrible effect on me. I so desperately needed to get it out of the system, my system, but I just couldn't talk to anyone about it and just held on to it as a secret in my life. What I did to my children pains me terribly. I wanted my kids to love me. I didn't think I was harming them at the time. I am in grief over the hurt I have caused and will forever carry this pain on my shoulders. I said, I'm determined to show you that the second chance that I've been given will be well worthwhile. I would like to get remarried, would like very much to help others who have gone through similar experiences, be helpful to my community in my efforts to reduce the sexual abuse within. And it's been a couple of years now, and hasn't reoffended, and is, I think, a very constructive part of his community. Now, I would contrast that with some of the more recent cases that we've had. Recent referral of a 40-year-old man. He was sexually abused by his father starting at age 8. Father did a short prison term, came back to the home, continued the abuse, and this is what this person suffered. Now, unlike the first example I gave you, he's accused of stopping his car and sexually assaulting a young boy on the street, a stranger. But he carries a diagnosis of major depressive disorder and PTSD as well. Now, when the DA agreed to have this person come into the court and others accused of similar crimes, I was reluctant really to, despite your thoughtful comments that I'm some sort of
No, that's okay.
Maven, I felt like, boy, do I really want to take these cases. But rather than say no, I think what we decided to do, and Colleen King is here, who's been with us from the beginning, and just a great advocate in the courtroom and asset to the court as a defense attorney. But rather than say no, what we agreed to do is have independent psychosexual reports, in addition to the psychosocial and psychiatric reports. And if we could determine that a person is not a predator or a pedophile, then we'd be much more sanguine in terms of managing that risk. I mean, this particular person, the psychiatric valuation said the nature of his conduct, which occurred despite his extensive therapeutic and psychiatric treatment history, makes it difficult to ascertain the role his psychiatric symptoms play. And the doctor said we have to have a comprehensive psychosexual evaluation, and that's what we're waiting for in that case.
Thank you. I just have a quick maybe response from both judges, and then I want to move to Vinny, and then we're going to bring up Valentina. So at the Greenburger Center, I would say of the last 5 years, I've had the most calls from parents with autistic children who have been accused of sexual offenses, mostly viewing child pornography. And their question to me is Hope House open yet? Can we get our child into Hope House? And at least these parents tell me that they think their children with autism sometimes view these things because there's particular aspects of that disease or situation that is the reason why they're viewing child pornography. I'm a lawyer, I have no idea, but I just find it fascinating that there's this over and over again, parents calling me with autistic children who have been accused of viewing child pornography online. Do you experience that? And if so, I know Judge Leifman, you talked last night about needing to have a different alternative for this population. Do you find that?
Well, it's interesting when I anticipated the question from our email last night, and I have a young man, 21 years old, who was referred to the court, and he's accused of, he's ready to plead guilty if they can work out the plea to child pornography, having child pornography. Now, again, the psychiatrist who did the report said that we'd have to rule out pedophilia in order to accept him for diversion into the court. The report indicates how isolated he is in his life. Obviously, on the autism spectrum, but also suffers from intellectual disability as well. A psychosocial report was done by a very respected forensic expert. And the expert in the psychosexual report said he's not a pedophile, he is heterosexual. The poor kid said that he doesn't want any kind of sexual relationship at all with anybody until he could get out from under his criminal charges here. But you know, it's a kid that was isolated, that sat there, that never paid for pornography, but watched it. And you know, I'm a lawyer too. I don't know why, but what I do know is that he's not a predator, he's not a pedophile. He suffers from a serious mental illness and intellectual disability, as well as being on the autistic spectrum. So we're ready to take a plea in that case as soon as they can work out the details.
We don't have a lot of cases of individuals with autism. Clearly, autism is in the DSM-5, and it is considered a mental health disorder. But I think it points to a couple things. One is the importance, the critical importance of having good psychiatrists that can do the kind of evaluations that Judge Demic's talking about. You know, just like you want a really good doctor diagnosing your illness properly, we need really good doctors to be able to diagnose these issues. So we're relying on the proper information to make a good decision. But I think also it's going to depend on where people are on the spectrum, functionality, what they actually understood or didn't understand. But I do think the laws and we as a society need to be a little bit more flexible in these issues involving people with these illnesses, because the standard lock them up response is not necessarily going to not only not be the most just, but not necessarily be a result that's going to get you a better outcome and reduce recidivism. And at the end of the day, what I really want is to make sure the person doesn't do whatever they did again, because that's how you protect the public safety. And so we either can make sure that people are getting released with treatment or not. And if they're not getting released with treatment, we're not doing anything to enhance the public safety.
Thank you, that's very helpful. Okay, Vinny, last but not least, I had a lot of questions for you, but I just want to, I think, go to the parole reform legislation that didn't pass. So tell us a little bit about that. What were the goals, and so what comes next for parole? And if you could just also talk about what the major issues are with respect to parole and people with mental illness.
So we started parole right here in New York State in 1876, right? And it was overtly an act of mercy and rehabilitation, super individualized in Elmira Penitentiary. Zebulon Brockway thought if people work harder and play by the rules and go to programs, they should get out earlier, but that should be conditional, and we should hire these people to help them when they get out into the community. And then that was the dominant ethic of both probation and parole right on up until the 1970s, until, you know, sort of mass incarceration exploded. And at that time, again, tracing ourselves back to our New York roots, there was a paper that, you know, was put out by CUNY, CUNY building right now, the Martinson report, that said nothing works when it comes to rehabilitating people who had broken the law. That's at least what Martinson alleged it said. It didn't quite really say that, but that was what the literally 60 Minutes story in Newsweek front page headline said. And that really left probation and parole kind of with nothing. I mean, prisons were supposedly rehabilitating people then too, but at least they could fall back on deterrence and incapacitation and punishment. Probation and parole pretty much had nothing left if we weren't rehabilitating people. And so we kind of pivoted as a field to, you know, resemble our big brother, the prison, more and more. Community corrections, we started calling ourselves. We started putting electronic monitors on people. What we did became intermediate sanctions. And we got much more punitive. We put on flak jackets. We carried guns. Right? So when I show up at probation in New York in 2010, my staff were all carrying guns. None of them had ever used that gun in their line of duty. 6 of them had committed suicide. And they only got the guns from my predecessor. So it wasn't like they had them for a long time. So that was kind of the state of the field. It's a field kind of, in many respects, without a real serious concretized mission, but a lot more people. So in like the late 70s, we began counting around late 70s, let's call it. There were less than 1 million people on probation and parole. It peaked at 5.1 million, so it was increased right alongside mass incarceration. It just didn't get studied as much, and it didn't get funded as much. So there's about twice as many people on probation and parole in America today as there are in prison and jail, but 9 out of $10 go to prisons. So what you then have what we step into right now is a super risk-averse field where you have line parole officers and probation officers with way too many people on their caseloads who have lots of challenges, mental health issues, they have substance abuse issues, homelessness, poverty, much harder to get a job with a criminal record than it was in the 1970s, much easier to track people's criminal records, so we know forever and ever. And they got to figure that out by themselves, really. And if I'm a parole officer or probation officer and I take a chance on a guy and he does well, he gets a job, gets married, finds an apartment, lives a happy, healthy life, I get nothing for that. I get zero. But if that person goes out and reoffends, I'm humiliated, I humiliate my boss's 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 boss, up to the governor if they reoffend really bad. Maybe I'll get transferred, maybe I'll get demoted, maybe I'll get written up, maybe I'll get fired. So we're expecting heroism out of people as a way to rescue the situation we're in, and that's really not a good public policy. There were some heroes in there, by the way, and there were some sadistic bastards. Most people fall in between that, and they're carrying that lunch pail to work every day, and they want to get to retirement at some point. So then we have situations like there was a guy the other day at Rikers, it's kind of a run-of-the-mill example. Not a good performer on parole. Periodically missing meetings with his parole officer and continuing to use drugs the whole time. Gets a couple of 30, 60, 90-day hits every once in a while. Because as we all know, anybody who's a trained professional, John Volpe's here, a 30-day reincarceration, that'll help you cure your heroin addiction. It's a sort of real good connection between those two. And so this guy's had a couple of them in his life, and he gets in there, and now he's looking at like a real one, because he's had his first couple of shots over the bow. And his lawyer gets him into Odyssey House. They keep postponing the case. The parole officer agrees, so now they have a deal. The parole officer is essentially, functionally, for those folks who you don't know, acting as the prosecutor. They don't have separate prosecutors, it's sort of the parole division. And the administrative law judge agrees. But they had to keep postponing until the person got in to Odyssey. And by that time, that administrative law judge had left that job, and so now it was a new administrative law judge. That person didn't agree. And so they basically said to the guy, even though he was in, he had the spot. 6 months if you plead now. If you don't plead now, you're going to get a year. So the guy, in tears, took the plea. So this happens over and over again. New York has the second highest number of people that get revoked for technical violations in the country. It's a little over 6,000. 2,000 people voluntarily go to prison. Why, might you ask, would somebody voluntarily go to prison? Because if the other alternative would be getting a technical violation. So there's a bunch of people that voluntarily go back to prison and go to treatment programs inside prison. It's better that there's a treatment program, but I'm pretty sure they could probably get treatment in the community if we refunnel the money in that direction. It's the only population that's increasing at Rikers Island while we're trying to close Rikers Island. It's gone up by double digits, the number of people in for technicals. It's about 600-700 in on any given day. It was like 639 the last time I looked. And that's just technicals. There's another 700 or so who are on parole and got rearrested. Many of them are rearrested for misdemeanors. In fact, the number of people in Rikers today arrested for a misdemeanor on parole equals the number of people arrested not on parole, which means 8.6 million of us account for as many as the 15 or so thousand people on parole, except they stay 99 days, whereas if you're not on parole, you stay 11 days. About half, I would say, and this is an estimate, and just talking to friends, have mental health challenges. The number of people paroled to homeless shelters over the last 4 years has doubled. That means essentially that we're providing hundreds of millions of dollars of prison for technical violations, because
Right.
8,000 people, that's several $100 million, and not housing people coming out of prison. It's a public policy choice, even though we don't view it that way.
Well, it all is. All these are public. So just very quickly, and then
Sure.
Valentina, we're going to bring you up.
Less is more?
Yeah, just what are just maybe the two,
Sure.
top goals of the less is
Sure.
more bill that didn't get passed?
Reduce the number of things for which you can be violated, pee and dirty, associating with somebody with a criminal record, et cetera, and shorten the amount of time you can get on a violation. Louisiana, we picked their numbers. It's like 7 days, 15 days, and then 30 days rather than years. And really importantly, although it wasn't in less is more, the next step was going to be calculating how much that saves and putting it into the kind of community programs that would help minimize the number of people getting to that point. Kind of like what you were saying, like, actually, several of you touched on this, like, how can we house folks, help them get jobs, help them with substance abuse issues, help them finish their education, so fewer of them ever get to the point where they're going to need to be in whatever building we want to put them in. And so by doing the one, by saying, okay, yeah, you can be punished for this, but only for a really short period of time, that saves an inordinate amount of money. We were going to go straight back to the budget process and say, now let's capture that money and figure out a way to get it in the hands of communities so they can help folks thrive while they're in the community. We'll probably now do both of those things simultaneously. I mean, it's only been a week since the session ended, but we're hoping to go back with something damn similar to less is more next year, do it right in a budget session so that both things happen simultaneously. We both shrink and fund the community response at the same time. I think that's probably, that'll feel maybe better to a lot of legislators and judges and, prosecutors and officials. Although we did get quite a few, we got 5 prosecutors to come out very publicly in support of less is more. We had a pretty substantial amount of support for it. I just think they ran into what people kept calling reform fatigue in Albany. They did a lot on bail, and I think they started to run out of gas at a certain point. I don't find that acceptable, by the way. And it was a guy wrote an op-ed piece about last week who was the guy was dying in the hospital. He had missed appointments. He was homeless and had a heroin addiction. And they violated him. We got on his deathbed. I think when moments like, and he died, he died, instead of just being able to die in that bed, he died in that bed, handcuffed to that bed. And his name's Jose Rivera. I don't want to talk about him as if he didn't have a name. And I think we need to ask ourselves, when reasonable people, because unless we assume all these parole officers and all these administrative law judges are just like they came from Mars and they're uniquely sadistic, let's assume that's not true for just a half a second. When a whole bunch of reasonable people do this stunningly unreasonable stuff, what's that about? We really have to ask that question. And I think part of the answer is, if you tell these people, assume all of this risk, and we're going to give you no resources, and we're going to give you no pat on the back when you do a good thing, and we're going to kick you in the ass when a bad thing happens, whether it was your fault or not, you create that stew. You should expect that stew to taste exactly like that stew tastes right now. This is exactly what behavior we ought to expect from those folks. And if we want that behavior to be different, we need to change those rules, not expect people to be heroes.
But the same goes true for the people that need the services.
No question.
I mean, we create an atmosphere, an environment that discourages them often from wanting to get better. And so everyone has this inverse pressure to do the wrong thing, as opposed to setting up systems that actually help people recover.
I mean, I didn't know Mr. Rivera, right, for example, but my assumption is he stopped appearing because he was using heroin. So, like, why am I going to voluntarily walk in there and get locked up? And so he was not appearing. And he was also homeless, too, so maybe that had something to do with it. I didn't really know him, but I don't... If we're saying to people, if you use drugs, which is the normal course of an addiction, if you relapse, we're going to imprison you for that, we should expect lots of abscondances. And if we tell the POs, if you don't do something when somebody absconds, you're going to be in trouble, we should expect lots of incarceration. And if we want that to change, we have to change those rules partly, and we have to provide the kind of resources that people need to turn their lives around. And we're not doing either of those right now.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all the time you took to explain. And so now we're going to get into more details of your programs, and also have invited Valentina up to ask you some questions. So Valentina.
Great. And thank you so much for inviting me to ask these questions, and thanks to all of you for answering them in advance. So you've spoken a lot today about programs that include mandates. And for those of us who have been advocates for individuals in mandated treatment, whether that's individuals who are committed to psychiatric hospitals or mandated treatment in the community, I think we always think about not just the mandate, but the quality of care. And what happens when you mandate individuals to care, but you don't take steps to ensure that the care that they're being provided is one, care that they want, care that they feel is actually treatment and that they can engage in. And so I'm wondering if, in creating these alternatives and in thinking about these models, you've considered quality of care issues. And if so, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how you propose ensuring that the care that people are receiving is, one, safe, person-centered, is collaborative, is culturally competent, and maybe above all is trauma-informed. So I think for each of you, if you could comment on that.
The alternative to Kendra's law, and I encourage everyone to work to expand it, that is a new direction, is incarceration. There is nobody who is arguing that incarceration is better than the worst program out there. So nobody I know is against quality care, but understand for the individual what the alternative is. And certainly as far as Kendra's law goes, 80% said being in it helped them get well and stay well. So I would argue that the quality of care for those under court-ordered outpatient treatment is already pretty high.
I would just like to say in a couple of ways, starting out just with the lack of beds in Arizona compared to the number at the national average, and that is long-term type of housing for the seriously mentally ill that we're talking about, this small, chronically seriously mentally ill population. We have in Arizona 1/10 of the national average, 1.3 beds per 100,000, whereas the national average is between 40 and 60. And the type of housing that we have in our system is not appropriate for this population as well, which is why they are so often found to be in such a dangerous situation, end up committing small and left untreated, sometimes violent crimes, and end up in a much more dangerous situation in prison or in jail. And then left untreated, when they're released, there's nowhere for them to go to get the type of care that they need to stay in treatment because they are anesthesia. So just starting from that point to avoid those types of scenarios, I think is the perspective we have to start with, because otherwise you end up with the situation that's unfortunately more typical than we want to admit, and that is a person like Curtis Bagley. If you'll Google him, a year ago in March, police found him, bystanders called police. He was huddled behind a barrier, screaming that people were after him and were going to kill him, and they were dead people. It took 5 police officers to subdue him and took him immediately to an emergency psychiatric care unit. He was released a few days later. 8 days after that incident, police found him in the backyard of a downtown Phoenix home. At his feet was a bloody kitchen knife. He had killed the resident inside who was bleeding to death on their kitchen floor, Joshua Fitzpatrick. This man had been petitioned to an urgent care psychiatric facility over 30 times. This is a failure of the system. So if we're talking about, the type of thing we're dealing with, we have to think of the context. Having said that, that's why Arizona's taking this slow, because we want to make sure that we're doing it right, that it isn't an unsafe place, and that there is proper oversight. And I didn't mention earlier, but in our bill, we actually are promoting two additional levels of care. One is working very well. It's 24-hour supervised residential care, long-term care where people will actually live. And what makes this successful, because these are called lighthouses, or a lighthouse model, and they are in the community. It's like a group home. A person who lives in one of these lighthouses, and there's only 4 of them, which is why we're hoping to proliferate them, that makes them different, is the culture, is the safety in having supervised caregivers on site. And when a person may relapse, decompensate, need to go to the hospital for a few weeks, they save their place for them. It's their home. And as has been alluded to earlier, it gives them an opportunity to succeed and establish relationships with one another and the community, maybe their church, their family, reestablish those relationships, and gives them an opportunity to succeed, have a job, have a dog. All of these things are happening. This is the kind of thing that we want to see proliferate in a secure setting for those that are unsuccessful in a regular lighthouse model. So part of what we're trying to do in Arizona is not only meet the need for those people that need to stay in treatment in order to succeed in their recovery, but to measure the outcomes, to have proper oversight. We plan to encourage our independent oversight committees to be involved in overseeing what's happening in this, watching whether or not these people are succeeding. Are they becoming homeless? Are they becoming reincarcerated upon release? Is the culture such that it is a successful program? We don't want anything that's not going to be that.
So I think quality of care is critical. Both Arizona and New York, you're welcome. You have Medicaid expansion. We're so generous in Florida that we gave you our $52 billion, so please spend it well. But I will tell you that some of the providers in my community are horrific. You wouldn't let your dog stay in some of these facilities. They're not clean, they're not kept well, they're very under-resourced. And if you want people to get better, you need to have high-quality care programs that are clean, that are using best practices, that are trauma-informed. Look, 92% of all the women in jail, in prisons in the United States with serious mental illnesses were sexually abused as children. 75% of men in jails and prisons with serious mental illnesses have very serious trauma history. So trauma-informed and trauma treatment are critical to whatever treatment program you have. And they have to be culturally competent. You have to have programs that are based on what people need so that they succeed. Because what often happens is they don't succeed and we blame them, when in fact, in many ways, they're not getting the level of care that they actually need. Hank Stedman, who ran Policy Research Associates, kind of the guru in this field, once said there's no such thing as a treatment-resistant person, there's only treatment-resistant programs. And so the key is to develop systems and programs that work for people that are ill. And we have not done a great job of doing that, which is one of the reasons we're having to develop this beautiful facility that's warm and welcoming that makes people want to get better. And so you have to design and develop programs that do meet those conditions that you talked about, or it makes it hard for people to recover.
What I'll say is this, and in New York City, we have good partners. You know, we're not a treatment court, we send people for treatment, and we prefer to have people live in the community. If a person doesn't have a home or a family, that's the problem for us, because housing is the huge problem. Finding places for them to finding services to wrap around them is not our problem. We're lucky with that, and we've had some very good partnerships over the last 17 years. I think the key in our court is flexibility. So that if something isn't working, I'm lucky enough to have a treatment team. So Ruth O'Sullivan, who's now the project and clinical director of the court, comes up with a treatment plan as the attorneys work out the plea, and the accused now goes into treatment and agrees to abide by the terms of the court, stay in treatment, stay on his medication. Today, 87% of the people that are actively involved in the court are compliant. We have a graduation rate of 81%. We're about, sometime this year, we'll have our 1,000th graduate. But when I talk about flexibility, what I'm saying is that sometimes, either because the evaluation of the psychiatrist and the social worker, maybe there was a little, the person wasn't completely honest with them, that we have to change the treatment plan, maybe add some drug treatment to it, things like that. But, we're flexible in the sense that we seek out the best treatment alternatives for the person. The clinical team is in contact with the program almost on a daily basis. I see the individuals every week, at least in the beginning, so relationships are established among each other in the courtroom, with me, with the clinical team. Every week they come in, not only do they see me, they see the person who's in charge of their case. And in certain circumstances, we have people that live out of state or their family lives out of state. We'll allow them to have treatment out of state and not come back to New York to see me for for extended periods of time, as long as they stay in contact with us. So, that's the way we work, and I think in the past 17 years it's worked quite well.
So the question was, how do we assure good quality of care in these places that we're establishing? I'm going to take my parole hat off and put my guy that used to run a correctional facility hat on, right? And the facility I took over was under consent decree for 19 years. I was the 20th director of it during that 19 years. Staff were beating the kids up, sexually assaulting them, selling them drugs. And I actually caught the guy that was selling them drugs, by the way, so it wasn't just like I thought he was selling them drugs. I know he was selling them drugs. It was a 200-bed facility. We had 280 kids in it, which meant think about it, it's a small middle school. If any of you ever worked in a 200-person environment, if somebody's selling them drugs, everybody knows who's selling them drugs. If somebody's sexually assaulting the kids, everybody knows who's having sex with them. If somebody's beating them up, everybody knows. You can't do that in a 200-bed facility that everybody doesn't know. So everybody wasn't beating them up and having sex with them and selling them drugs, but everybody knew who was, and they were all law enforcement officers. So they were all full of shit as far as I was concerned, right? Mm-hmm. And so I'm doing that. I was fortunate enough to have money to build a new facility, because the place was terrible. It's called Oak Hill, by the way. Mm-hmm. And when we came time to build a new facility, the architect said, do you have plans for the old facilities, for Oak Hill? I said, I doubt it, but let me look. And so we looked, and lo and behold, we found those plans. And those plans sounded great. There was not a plan. Let us beat up, sexually assault, and sell drugs to the District of Columbia's children. Nobody was saying that. They were saying, let us rehabilitate our children. We're going to make a modern facility. It's going to be great. That's what everybody's hope was for this place. So my answer to your question is worry. Whenever the government locks a door on a human being, we ought to worry. And while we have to sell places like this, and maybe, DJ, what you said is right, maybe the alternative for the people in your Kendra's line, I haven't studied any of the things you three have done, but maybe the alternative really is prison, right? So then maybe it's better. Maybe it is, I don't know. Like you're saying it is, so I'm going to go with that, right? I'm still worried. I'm worried about your facility and your facility. Because you know how when you buy a used car, a new car, the day after you buy it, it goes down in value? The day after you open a locked facility, it takes a major step away from all the hopes and dreams of everybody who built it and starts to institutionalize. And we got to fight against that institutionalization from the day it opens to the day we knock it down. That's what I would say about how we assure quality of care. I think people who have been locked up need to be part of that, either if it's a prison or a juvenile facility or a psychiatric facility. People who have been in locked custody need to be part of whatever oversight there is. It has to be disgustingly open, disgusting to us bureaucrats, because we want to close it, because we want to run it without you all folks looking over our shoulders. And we have to just fight against that. We have to make it small. 200 worries me, Judge. I'm not going to lie.
But that's open.
That's the open part. Okay. The 16 feels a lot better to me. Like, it's a lot harder
The
to
only
institutionalize 16.
locked part is the crisis unit. The rest of it
Okay.
is open, and people come and go, and they come in for their day activities, and they're free to move around. We agree with you.
Good.
We're not trying to build a new psychiatric hospital.
And so that I guess that's what I would say. It's locking people behind anything, even when it's necessary, is never a benign government act. We tend to suck at it, by and large, and I don't think I'm not going out on a limb on that one. Like, just look around, right? Most of the places are pretty damn terrible, and so we need to worry about it.
Great, thank you so much. And actually, maybe to just follow up on something that you said, which is my next question, and I know Judge Leifman touched on this a little bit, but I'm wondering, have you included people with lived experience? And when I say people with lived experience, I'm talking about people who are living with mental health needs, people who have been psychiatrically hospitalized, or those who have mental health needs and have been incarcerated, in both, and this is, I think, an important distinction, both the development of the models and the operationalizing of the programs. So, we hear a lot about peer navigators and peers, and I think they're incredibly important and have been very successful. We hear less about people with lived experience being at the planning stages and at the table when we're talking about creating these models, and when we talk about oversight with respect to quality of care. And so I'm wondering if you've done that, and obviously among people with lived experience are lawyers and doctors and policymakers and professors and artists and everyone else. And so I'm just wondering if you've incorporated those people, and if not, why not, or would you consider doing that going forward?
So it's a big part of what we do, even from the designing of the new facility. We actually had a study done. It was interesting. For a lot of people in the criminal justice system with serious mental illnesses, they also have what we call criminogenic risk factors. And so not only do a lot of these individuals need mental health treatment, they often need cognitive behavioral therapies to deal with the behaviors that got them involved. Substance abuse, literacy, things like that, family relationships. There's a lot of good models and assessment tools. So we thought we were being very clever, and we set up this new programming for kind of that 97 group that were really, really sick. And we brought in this woman from London to teach us, because there's nothing in the U.S. that has a cognitive behavioral therapy designed for people with mental illnesses. They did something in England. So we brought her over. We designed this incredible program. And unfortunately, the location of the facility wasn't really ideal. And so a lot of people didn't go to that program. But we saw remarkable success anyway for this population. And it was a research design project. And what the researchers found is that it was the assignment of the peer to the individual, which is why they succeeded in spite of not having the cognitive behavioral therapies. So what we realized very quickly is that they are the secret recipe of our success. And so we go out of our way to make sure that they are involved in every aspect of what we do. And I think part of the problems we have, and you touched upon it about institutionalizing, you don't want to create any program that overly structures human beings. They need to live. And what our peers do is help them go out and live again, and not worry so much about them coming to court so many days or showing up to their treatment program every day, but really helping them just get their lives back, which seems to have as much, if not more, to do with them succeeding than anything that we were trying to do in the past.
I'll tell you a story. I mean, I wasn't involved in the planning of the court, so I'm not sure about that. And since we have 6 case coordinators and each one has a caseload, I don't necessarily use peers. But I'm going to tell you an interesting story. When we first were starting the court, project director was hired, clinical director was hired, and then we needed case coordinators as well. There was one individual, Mustafa Garment was his name, who applied for the job. And he had worked with the project director, Lucille Jackson, in the past, and she had a lot of respect for him. It turns out he himself was living with a serious mental illness and had in his past been convicted of a felony and served time in prison. The administration at the Office of Court Administration were not thrilled with the idea of us putting him on the mental health court payroll. The chief administrative judge at the time, who later became the chief judge, Jonathan Leifman, needed a lot of information about this individual and needed to know why I wanted him to be on the mental health court staff. Well, obviously, if I tell somebody that comes before me, you can do this, you're doing great, keep going, okay, it means something. But if somebody who did it tells him, I did it, you can do it, it means a lot more. And he is retired now and deserved his well-earned pension, and I hope he's thriving. I'll just say one other thing about the question that you asked, and that is that I've had graduates come back to the court. I remember there was a young girl, really, who ran away from her home in Massachusetts, came here, was picked up by a pimp and prostituted. And the district attorney in Brooklyn has a policy of asking the victim if they will agree to mental health court treatment as opposed to traditional prosecution. In this case, the victim, who she had cut with a broken bottle, wanted traditional prosecution and didn't want her to be anywhere near the part of a mental health court treatment. Turns out he was the pimp she was trying to get away from when she cut him. So to the district attorney's credit, he allowed her to come to the court. Put her into a therapeutic community, she ran away. Ordered a bench warrant, got her back, put her into a community again, happened back and forth a few times. Finally it stuck, she did well, she graduated, she got a job, she had a relationship with her father, came back to the court just to say hello and tell me how she was doing. Turns out she came in on the day that the mental health court was in session. I asked her if she would address the 100 or so people that were sitting in the court to tell her story, and she did. And I think that's an example, maybe not a formal example of how we use peer support, but an example of how it can be used and used to great effect.
Can I just mention that with the Less is More Act, there were several formerly incarcerated people on the drafting committee and lobbying committee. I thought I saw Donna Hilton walk in, but I'm not seeing her right now, from the Catal Center. Oh, there you are. As well as there was a liaison going back and forth to a group of men in prison who were also commenting on the bill as we were drafting it. It was super important, and I think that when there was testimony and when there was public speaking, that the voices of folks that had actually been on parole and had suffered at the hands of these super ticky-tack fouls that lock you back up or humiliate you, it was really, really important to have that voice. And I think if I was to look back on anything we didn't do well enough, it would be to add more and more of that, because I think we deluge the legislature with data, but it's really the human stories that make people sit up and take notice.
I am not as fond of this as many people are. If you Google an article I wrote in Psych News, I went through the research on peer support. Now, having said that, Kendra's Law is probably the most peer-centric program there is, because embedded in the law is the right to develop your own treatment plan. So if we're talking about peers being able to develop the program, in Kendra's Law, the peer has a right to develop their own treatment program, and the judge is required to consider directions that they have in a mental health proxy. Not required necessarily to do that, but to consider it. The other thing, infinitely more important in my mind, is no one talks about the side effect of peer support. And I can say unequivocally with research in New York, California, and I happen to know Arizona, apparently not in Florida, creating peer support networks creates networks of people who are against improvements for the most seriously mentally ill. They are working to impede the use of Kendra's law, impede HIPAA relief so parents can participate in helping their loved ones. They look to impede the availability of electroconvulsive therapy and long-acting injectables. So I think we have to also look at the side effect of creating peer networks on the system in addition to any benefit it may have for individuals who receive it.
I would just add, and thank you for the question, because I think it's important. In our experience, I think there is a tremendous benefit for peer support, but in the right context. As DJ said, when we were moving forward with filling out a much-needed level of care, they were the loudest opponents in many cases, and unfortunately, some of them, and I hate to lump them all together because I believe that there are a lot of peers with their heart is really in the right place. And once they understood what we were doing, that we don't need a one-size-fits-all, we do need an individualized type of program because everybody's recovery looks different. And so you do need those levels of care. But it seemed as if they were afraid of having their ox gored, I should say. And so, you know, money taken away, $2.5 billion goes to our mental health care system in Arizona out of a $12 billion budget. That's both state and federal money every year, and yet we have this population is slipping through the cracks untreated. And although everybody acknowledges the need, it just was really hard to fathom why there was that. They were basically the only ones that were opposing and wanting the status quo, as if every level of care in place right now is capable of meeting the needs of those in the system when the research says no, the numbers of incarcerated say no, the homelessness say no, the rehospitalizations say no, the public safety say no, all of that. And yet there was this opposition, and it's we sought their advice, and we hope to continue to work with all stakeholders, because frankly, all of those that work with this population are for this level of care and expanding the types of accommodations and housing, treatment that's available to them to help them in their recovery, and then to use peer support where it's appropriate. I think, you know, to your point about accountability, that accountability has to reach across the spectrum. More accountability, more transparency when we have locked facilities, obviously, I think that's critical. But we have to do a cost-benefit analysis for the use of peers as well. How beneficial are they to which populations? We have to start getting specific. And so I welcome all voices. They're all needed in this realm. Thank you.
I think what part of the problem you'll find sometimes is that the history towards people with mental illnesses is so cruel and horrifying that there's a lot of distrust on any new programs that come along. And so I think part of our, you know, look, if you look at the history, first treatments were insulin shock therapy without treatment, lobotomies. I mean, there's good reason for peers to be skeptical of new programs that us sane people have put together for them over the years. And so I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we have them earlier, and that you develop the trust, and that they understand we're actually going to listen to their voice and bring them in that way, because we really have not had any pushback in Florida from any of our peer groups for any of these kinds of issues. And I think part of it may be because the courts have led it, and so there's a little bit more trust about that. And so we just have not had this kind of experience. So I think we've just tried really hard to be sensitive to some of those historical concerns, which I could understand, and have really tried to do the opposite, and it's worked quite well for us. All of our peers have criminal records that work for the court, and it's been in their pro-medication, they're pro-treatment, and they work really hard to make sure that these individuals have reestablished relationships to incentivize them to get better, and it's been fine.
The notion of applying research, I think, is an important one, and I think that I'm not an expert in peer support for people who are mentally ill. I am in probation and parole, and there's not a lot of strong evidence that probation and parole actually has an impact on either public safety or rehabilitation. Like if this was a medicine, doctors would stop prescribing it. I think the major reason it will exist tomorrow is because it existed yesterday, not because there's a strong research base for it. So it's not just peer mentoring that doesn't have a support. It's the biggest part of the criminal justice system. Like New York went from having 70,000 people on probation, not parole now, I'm moving over to probation. Now we have like 22,000 people on probation. Look out the window, see if it's okay out there, because there's 50,000 fewer people being supervised by somebody. And last I looked, New York was doing pretty good during that period of time. We didn't have an increase in crime, and we didn't have an increase in incarceration. In fact, quite the opposite. We had sharp declines in crime and sharp declines in incarceration. And that's just New York. But if you look around the country, as probation populations and parole populations increased, it wasn't associated with declines either in crime or incarceration, which are its two main purposes. We're supposed to either be making our communities safer or diverting people from incarceration, or a little of both. And probation and parole really haven't proven themselves in that regard, so much so that my predecessor, Marty Horn, has come out and said we should just abolish parole and just hand people vouchers and let them go find their treatment and see if that works any better. I think it'd be hard to argue against that, to be honest with you, and I think if some elected official wanted to experiment with it, it actually might be a worthwhile experiment to see if no parole and some network of community-based services, hopefully community-driven ones, would be better than what we have now. But at the very least, if you're not willing to go that far, substantially smaller, substantially shorter, and substantially more supportive and rehabilitative probation and parole is the direction we should be going in, and particularly for people who have mental health problems or homeless and have substance abuse problems. What we do now is chase them around and make them follow 22 rules that somebody made up 40 years ago.
Without transportation, without housing, we make it impossible for them to succeed. We actually set them up to fail. And that statistic you mentioned, you had twice as many people that had committed technical violations on misdemeanors going back to jail than people that were in there committing a substantive offense. And that's the problem. And for people with mental illnesses and substance use, it's impossible to expect them to succeed.
It's a setup. It
is a total setup. And so you have to give them some time to have a life and less time to have to worry about showing up to a program that is not necessarily benefiting them.
Right. So we have about 20 minutes left. I think, Valentina, if you can ask one more question, and then we're going to do some question and answers.
Sure, absolutely, and I thank you all for your responses. I have a quick question actually about diversion and about a model for individuals with serious mental health needs where there's a potential prison penalty for noncompliance with treatment. and whether there's something kind of fundamentally flawed with a model where we say we are diverting people who we know, for whatever reason, either need treatment or need access to treatment, aren't an appropriate population for the jails. Not that I think anyone necessarily is, but that's a separate matter. And at the end, kind of associating treatment with prison penalty. Is there something else that can be done in its place? Is there a model that would work better both for the individual, for the community, for society at large? And again, speaking specifically about people with severe mental health needs.
Well, we do a pre-adjudicatory program, which I prefer. I don't like the idea necessarily of making someone take a plea to get treatment. And so in our program, you're always free to go to trial at any point you want. So it's a voluntary kind of program. I work with this organization called GAP, which is the Group for the Advancement of Psychiatry. It's a 75-year-old organization that's a think tank for psychiatry. And for the last 4 years, we've been working on a project, and we're almost done, to develop what the ideal crisis system should look like for people with mental illnesses. And it's a lot different than what we do today. And so part of the things that we're thinking about, and I don't remember where this is going on, maybe even be outside the United States, but maybe in LA, when you call 911 for a mental health call, what they do now is they redirect the call to a mental health provider and to like a 211 line. And then the 911 call taker stays on the line with them until everything is set up. Provider goes out and tries to handle the situation without any law enforcement involvement at all. And it's working exceptionally well. The idea of, when someone is involuntarily committed, police procedures require them to handcuff them, put them in the back of the police car, which is terrible. I mean, the neighbors think the person committed a crime and, they're going for treatment. And so we need to start thinking, are there better ways to keep law enforcement out of this entirely if we can? And that's an interesting model that's showing some wonderful success. It is complicated in the criminal justice system because, as I mentioned earlier, some of these individuals, and it's a small group, even if they didn't have a mental health disorder, would be doing things that would get them involved in criminal justice involvement. And so we can't be totally naive about this either. That doesn't mean they need long sentences, but there is some leverage in the criminal system that does enable us to encourage people to get treated who might not otherwise do it. Would I prefer the civil system to do it? 1,000%. And I think we need to keep building systems and models to do that. But as long as we have people getting arrested with these illnesses, we then at least have to have a system in place to make sure that we're getting them out and into treatment. And that's what we do, I think, very well in Miami. And we're very proud of that. And the idea is to not give people criminal records, because once you give people, it's hard enough to live with the stigma of having a mental illness, but having to live with the stigma of being a criminal with mental illness has very serious consequences. Employment, housing, hanging out with other criminals. And so we really want to try to keep those folks out of the criminal justice system the best we can. So I don't know if there's an ideal model. There's a program in Trieste, Italy that has been going on for a long time that has some amazing benefits that we are starting to look at. That may be an ideal model. I don't know if culturally it's easier to do something like they're doing there than we could do here, but it's certainly worth looking at anything that works to keep people out of our criminal justice system.
Did you want to? Sorry.
Well, my model is a plea model. And I guess in an ideal world, you wouldn't ask somebody to take a plea to a serious crime in order to get out from under criminal charges. The political reality is that a district attorney is a partner in the court as well as the defense attorneys. District attorneys have to get reelected. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. I have a young man in the court, first psychotic break. He, on a street in Brooklyn, had an argument with somebody and stabbed him while yelling anti-Arabic slurs at him. He was charged with attempted murder as a hate crime. Now again, this is not a case that cries out for diversion. The DA allowed this young man to come into the court on condition that he have a 3-year mandate, plead guilty to assault in the first degree, assault with a deadly weapon, and face a serious prison time if he didn't succeed in the court mandate. Now, the alternative would be, don't let him come into the mental health court. But the district attorney is saying, well, if I want him there for 3 years and he doesn't take a plea, 3 years from now, do I have witnesses? Do I have, cops? Are they retired? Are they moved out of state? Can I prove a case against them? So it becomes a political balance, and that's the balance we have. And I'm pleased to say that it's been 2 years since he came into the court. This kid has done everything we've asked him to do, and I have no doubt he's going to succeed and graduate and have a misdemeanor instead of a felony and a conditional discharge and instead of probation. And
What the victim think on it? I mean, was the victim involved? I'm just curious.
I wouldn't be involved with the victim, but the district attorney's policy is to get the victims okay. And so I'm look, at 17 years, a handful of people have said no to treatment, which I think is remarkable because these victims have been traumatized, as well as the trauma that we talk about in terms of the defendants. So, could be imperfect. I don't know. This is what I live with. This is what I have, and I think it works.
I just wanted to respond.
I do think it's different when it's a more violent offense, because they really are looking at very serious time, and it's a lot different. We do nonviolent felony cases and all misdemeanors. And so I really do think that needs to be pre-adjudicatory and people shouldn't have to plea. But when you get to this level, and Judge Emic is unique, most of the mental health courts don't do these types of cases, and that's why they don't work very well. But this is a different model for a different population, and you have to understand that and look at it through that lens as opposed to the general lens out there, which most mental health courts don't work very well because they're taking low risk, low need people that don't need to be in mental health courts. This is much, much different.
Yeah, and I think the genesis of that question was the nuance where you can have someone with severe mental illness who is actually compliant with treatment, and let's say the medication they've been taking is no longer working in the same way that it was. And so there's always an option for decompensation, and if that ends up amounting to non-compliance with a prison penalty, then almost how do you work with those situations?
That's an excellent point. And it's been few and far between that I've had to sentence people to prison terms. I do when I feel that the risk to public safety outweighs the needs of the defendant. So we don't operate on a hair trigger. If somebody relapses, if somebody's off their medication, if somebody doesn't go to their program, I may have to get control over them and have some sort of sanction against them, but always give them second, third, fourth chance, unless, as I said, I'm worried about innocent people being affected by decisions I made.
Okay, do you have the last word, and then we'll go to questions?
I think it's related to your question earlier about quality of care, and if we rated programs by are they reducing rates of homelessness, arrest, incarceration, suicide, and needless hospitalization, those are the metrics of a quality program. Kendra's Law does not have any criminal penalties for non-compliance with it, but it's why I admire these people, because they can, each one of them can put their program up and say, did it reduce homelessness, arrest, incarceration? They're willing to be measured by those metrics, and that's what defines a quality program for me.
Thank you. Okay, so we have, I think, about 9 minutes for some questions. We usually give you more time in these panels to ask questions, but I'm sorry, we've just had a lot of panelists and they were all so fascinating. We could talk for 2 more hours. So I'm going to ask Anna to bring you the microphone. I'm going to ask that you ask a question, not make a statement, because I'm sure have more questions than we can manage. So there's a question in the back. Oh, right. And some of the panelists will stay after if you'd like to ask them individual questions.
My question is, did you share your good ideas with the governor and additionally the mayor, aka Big Bird, aka Frankenstein?
Okay. And who is that question directed to?
All the panel members.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, we briefed the governor's staff and the mayor's staff on less is more.
Okay. Another question over here, Anna.
This is about the mental health court. I wanted to ask, since I've had experience from and hearing from a number of people that have told me that they had to plea to a more mentally ill people, had to plea to a much greater offense than what they were charged with in order to qualify for the mental health court. And I was wondering what your experience is in regard to that.
Thank you.
Yeah, not in Brooklyn. I don't know where that experience might have been. Nassau County. But we made a conscious decision, the district attorney's office as well, and believe me, the defense bar in Brooklyn is very active, and they wouldn't let that. But not only would usually a person pleads to a lower charge, like for example, the example I just gave, the charge was attempted murder, even though it's the same level felony, the plea was to assault in the first degree. But not only that, but the jail alternative can never go up because they're in the mental health court. So if the person's in a traditional court part and they're given an offer by the district attorney of so many years in prison for a plea, and they are allowed to come into the mental health court, that cannot change. It can only go down. So that's Brooklyn now.
Judge Leifman? Did you have a...
Yeah, as I stated earlier, we don't require a plea at all. Ours is pre-adjudicatory, and the person can go to trial at any point they want, which never happens. And so it works out fine. And it's the way we set it up, and for us, it's just worked out very well.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I'm going to do here, and then I'll come over there. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm actually a reentry social worker on the PACE unit at AMKC, which is the largest facility on Rikers Island with the largest MO population. And I have an individual who is on the autism spectrum, and right now he's been incarcerated for more than a year after 4 months in Bellevue, because he tried to kill himself with an officer's gun in a very crowded area in New York City. He is not from New York. He actually came here on his own from Pennsylvania. And so one of my questions is, we find it very hard to find supportive housing for folks because the providers will not interview our patients while they are incarcerated. And so what happens is they have to go to shelter because they are homeless, and they have to wait. They have to wait months often before they will even get an interview, before they will even come off a wait list. There was only one provider, and I have to applaud Community Access, because they did interview our patient. However, he had to be, and I think it's the first time it's ever happened on Rikers Island, we got him an escort with the DA investigators to go do this interview, and he's now sat on a wait list. And so part of what I'd like, to advocate for in terms of, the courts and the laws is, how do we get community providers to come to speak to our folks so that we can at least get them faster track housing? Because it's a lot faster to go from prison to transitional housing, like OMH facilities, than it is for people who come out of Rikers.
Yep. Thank you for the question.
See, I think there's so many little nuances, important nuances like what you just described in this system, and I think what it comes from is us having this system that just kind of, in the mid-90s and 80s, there was animus. We wanted to lock more people up. We wanted to supervise more people. We wanted to do the things, and we did them in ways that I don't think anybody ever could have predicted in terms of how much we were willing to spend on locking human bodies up. Now it kind of is, to the degree it's not being tended to, it's more like a weed in the yard. And I think we need a full examination of what is happening with the thousands of people who exit our prisons and jails every year, so that details like what you just described can be focused on and solved. This is not an insolvable problem. Instead, what's happening is people go to work with their lunch pails every day and supervise people on parole. And if they mess up, they get 90 days in jail and prison. First they spend a couple months in jail, and then they spend the rest of the time in prison. We spend our hundreds of millions of dollars on that, and then say, "Ooh, we have no money to house these people. We have no money for supportive housing. We have no money for help." We, of course, have money for those things. And, of course, nobody really thinks that violating Jose Rivera on his deathbed was a good idea. Even the guy who did it probably didn't think that it was such a good idea. But if we don't do a sort of full examination and imagine the redeployment of those resources in a way that make us feel like something reasonable is happening to the person you just described, then tomorrow we're going to do what we did yesterday. So rather than think about how do we fix that one part of it, I think we really, and I know that Mr. Condiff has said he's a member of the New York State Bar Association's task force on parole, which just got established like yesterday. Yeah, and I think that that's fantastic, that like the week after the session ended and didn't fix parole, the Bar Association established something with good people on it that's going to take a look at that. I think it needs to look at more than just how many things do we violate people on, how long do they stay, but really more on what is the alternative system we could design that could replace the current mess that we have for people under supervision and for people, who have mental health problems who aren't addressed by the current approach, but really might not need to be in a locked correctional facility.
So you raise a great point, and something we recognized as well. Look, the illnesses are much more complicated than these solutions. It's just setting systems up to do these things. So we recognized that as a problem, and a few years ago, we applied and received a grant for what we call a jail in-reach program. And what we do is, it's staff from the court we now embed in the jail, and they are there to do exactly that. They're interviewing everybody. They are filling out, we use a program called SOAR, because we don't have expanded Medicaid, that will help get people on Medicaid benefits before they leave jail. We find their housing before they leave. We've assessed them to see what their psychosocial needs are, their trauma needs are, their criminogenic risk factors are, all before they're leaving. And that way, when they come out, we have worked everything out and have a smooth transition from the jail back into the community, and it works so much better. And because it's a grant, we had to keep a lot of data on it. We're putting the final report together now. The data is phenomenal in terms of outcomes, are so improved by doing that. So you raise a great point.
Thank you. So it is 11 o'clock. We have, if you want to stay, we can ask the one last question. Is it quick? Okay. Well, it needs to be, so if you can.
Loud. I think people can hear me. Thank you. So this is the AOT table, right? And so the question we have, we get a lot of referrals from Rikers Island. We appreciate it. We get referrals from everywhere. Often I will call, I'm an attorney, I will call DA's offices. I'm a former prosecutor myself in Bronx County, legal aid, and say, look, we have this referral. We're calling from AOT, and very often people are clueless. What is this program? Can this be made part of a plea agreement? Is this can this be part of an alternative to incarceration? And as DJ pointed out, no, there aren't criminal consequences for not following along with AOT, but we can be helpful in a lot of ways. But it would be good if there was some education in the criminal justice system. If you guys as leaders can help facilitate that, like I said, amongst the district attorney's offices, amongst legal aid, Bronx defenders, whatever it is, so that they understand what we can do with a referral, how they can help us, or maybe not help us, or whatever the case is. There needs to be more education, and if you can somehow, like I said, facilitate that, or do you have plans to do that, that would really be helpful for us and really for the community of patients more than anything. That's really my question. Are there plans for that?
Thank you very much.
First, I want to thank the AOT table, because you're dealing with the hardest to treat, and there's a whole bunch of people who don't want you to succeed. The mayor's spending about $12 million a year on his education component and his phone number. There's an op-ed at the table that has our recommendations, and why aren't they using the advertising budget for New York City well to advertise to parents, here's how you can get somebody into AOT. They have a poster they're running that says, if you're under pressure, call New York City well. Well, that's every New Yorker. Why don't they say, if you have a loved one who's seriously mentally ill, psychotic, delusional, and living on the street, why don't you call Lifeline? And then why isn't Lifeline giving people the pro forma petitions they need so they can petition on their own? The mayor and his wife have totally refused to support you guys in the way you deserve to be supported.
Okay, on that note,
Add one little thing.
just one.
I really appreciate you bringing that up because, you didn't mention providers and physicians and all those social workers that work in the system as well. Patients, parents of individuals in this population are clueless. They don't know where to start. And we do need to do a much better job in giving them the tools to teach the providers the law, how HIPAA actually works, and how to include families and the information that they can provide so that they can do a better job meeting the needs of those with these serious mental illnesses and work more in tandem. So we definitely are focused on doing that. We ran a HIPAA rewrite bill a few years ago that clarified what the role is of a provider, but all around, the whole system needs to be better communication and education.
So real quick, number one is in Florida, we actually extended AOT to the misdemeanor criminal division. It's fascinating and working brilliantly well. Number two, Judge Emic and I work with an organization called the Judges Psychiatric Leadership Initiative, and we've trained about half the state's judges now, including these issues. The American Bar Association 2 years ago passed new criminal justice mental health standards, and part of it is a requirement of educating prosecutors, judges, and lawyers. And to the credit, finally, of the Prosecutors Association, this is the first year they're doing anything on mental health, and we're doing training for them starting now on a lot of these issues. So it's coming. Be patient, but it is a big shift going on right now in the right direction.
So do you, Judge Emic or Vinny, do you have a final quick word to say? No? Judge Emic, no? All right, then I want to thank you all, and thank you, Valentina. Thank you for a great panel, and thank you all for coming.